I was the other ones.
I have things half-assed. Right.
Yeah.
I haven't said that much since I was a child.
What's that?
Generally say half-assed.
Oh, really?
It's refined. How would you spring from there? Well, every now and then, with my students, I'll come across a Canadianism that I don't realize is a Canadianism. Yeah. And like one time I said, oh, it's tickety-boo. What's tickety-boo? I said, hunky-dory. And they said, what's hunky-dory? I said, no, I started, I said, beer and Skittles. And they said, what's beer and Skittles? I said, tickety-boo. Hunky-dory. You were messing with that. No, I wasn't. I just didn't know, like, what is American?
Well, those are delightful expressions.
No, what did I do? Well, you just dated yourself by saying you're going to use overheads.
I use overhead still.
Or is it that your laptop is spoiled?
No.
PowerPoint. Yes, slides. Yeah.
Scott said this is plug and play.
Is it not plain? It's plugged.
I had to, what did you push a button? I want to look too, because I'm in here, but it says search. There's different ones here. It's here, source search. Oh, and then you have to open. Oh, that'll help.
That could do it.
And resize.
Yeah.
You resize. There we go. There you go. Yeah. And then you there. But we've got you now. You push that. Now push that.
Okay.
There it comes. Okay.
All right.
Oh, good. Okay.
You can't believe that I helped.
Yeah.
That's the first I did.
Okay. I'm gonna just ask for a little bit of help, and if someone could be my timekeeper, and we're supposed to go until 12:20, right?
Yeah.
So if someone with those old-fashioned watchy thingies could just tell me when it's about 10 minutes and then 5 minutes. And I mean, I have one of these things, but I'll let you forget it. So for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Dr. Korcok. I teach at Concordia College. No, Concordia University, Chicago. Still want to say Concordia College RN, but it's in River Forest. And I teach, my bread and butter course it's called, the old title is Spiritual Nurture. We're changing it to Catechetics in the Lutheran school. So I have all the Lutheran school teachers coming to me. And this particular lecture grew out of a kind of a serendipitous event. And I had a class over in the education building. And as professors are wont to do, they had posters, all over the place. And there was Vygotsky and Erikson and Montessori and all that posters. And that particular day, I came unprepared to class, and I ran short of lecture material. And I said, hey, let's research what these guys believe. And that started me on this whole journey, which is now growing into a book chapter. And so having said that, there are a couple of qualifications. One is that the title says Erikson, and I just realized I did not have enough time to cover everyone, so Erikson got dropped. The other thing is that I don't want to sound too disparaging, I don't want to speak too disparagingly about people in the world of education professors. Because they, like me, were taught in the same way. They, like me, weren't taught to question who these people were and what they taught, believed, and confessed. And I look at my personal journey of discovering these people, and I say, it was just a serendipitous thing that happened to me. I would still be thinking the same way. So I don't want to sound too harsh. So what I do want to do is look at these three people and ask the question, what did they teach, believe, and confess? It is a very simple Lutheran approach to understanding anybody, is what do they teach, believe, and confess? But it is a question that we rarely ask when it comes to the people who construct education for our students. Now, in order to do that, I want to just lay a little groundwork and look at three influences. You have to realize that all these are working in mostly in the first part of the 20th century. They're all swimming in the same pool. They're all reading the same authors, and try and pull one set of ideas out from all the others. It really is impossible. But I wanted to simplify it and just bring it down to a couple influences. One is Johann Pestalozzi. Now, Pestalozzi is a Swiss educator. He really changes things. And there's a lot of things that he does that's different. But the one part that I'm interested in, as far as the teach, believe, and confess, is that he, more than anyone else, begins down this path of separating education away from the church's catechesis and saying the church really doesn't have a role. In fact, one of his quotes is that the best education that the best catechism that a child can learn is the catechism that is learned apart from his pastor. So the idea is that the church and pastors and parents are actually hindrances to developing the Christian faith. A child instead should look inward. Friedrich Freugle, there's a name that everyone should know. Anyone identify Freugle? Kindergarten, founder of kindergarten, right? He's a laughing stock in his own country when he comes up with the kindergarten problem ideas. But a couple of revolutionaries from the 1848 revolution love his ideas. They moved to Wisconsin and they started kindergarten there. But Freugle, not only is he the founder of kindergarten and revered in ECE world for that, he also talks about the need to remove children from the influence of parents. This is his motivation for kindergarten. Because children are not born sinful, where do they learn sinful and evil understandings? It must be from the parents and from the church. And so if we can get them away from the parents earlier, then we have a better chance at molding them to understand true religion. And for him, the true religion is not Christian religion. He talks about a world religion, the Weltreligionis. And he wants children inculcated in this big, massive world religion that is within all people. This is really true. You could read whole books on him. The other one I want to just touch on is Herbert Spencer. And anyone familiar with Herbert Spencer? Yeah? Up till the 19th century, the turn of the 20th century, people say that Herbert Spencer was as influential, if not more influential, than Charles Darwin. He is actually the person who coins the phrase survival of the fittest. He talks about evolution before Darwin writes his book. And he marries evolutionary concepts with psychology and sociology and comes up with this idea that society is evolving and progressing and getting better. And that this evolution can be observed, this is really important, it can be observed scientifically. We can analyze it, we can measure it, and we can guide and direct this evolution to this higher, nobler plane. Yeah?
One point, I apologize, while you're talking about, are you able to, I don't know who Piaget, Erikson, and
Vygotsky?
You got, yeah, can you just give a brief synopsis about those?
By the end of this lecture, you'll know more than you ever thought you wanted to know about. You'll be sorry. But not Erikson. I dropped Erikson. So, the other thing that Spencer says is that classical studies retards a child's ability to learn. So the old style of education restricted people, and we had to free their mind. And how are we going to figure this out is by scientific studies. And so that what grows out of Spencer and what grows out of the 19th and 20th century is this idea of a dispassionately involved scientist who can observe and come to conclusions, and these are empirically provable, right? Now, it's debatable whether that even applies to hard science, because every scientific discovery began with a belief in something, right? That's what motivated them to do experiments. It's a lot more debatable when it applies to sciences like psychology, whether anyone can ever be dispassionately involved. So the first one I want to look at is Montessori. And Maria Montessori, and the quote that's on this, I'm sorry it's a little bit smaller, but it says, "The greatest sign of success for a teacher is to be able to say that children are now working as if I do not exist." I said to my wife, there were some teachers I had, which I wish they didn't exist. But she does not mean it in that way. Her idea is that children should be free to learn according to that which interests them the most. And Montessori is hugely influential. You've heard of Montessori schools, right? Montessori education. It's over 4,000 Montessori schools, certified Montessori schools in America today. And I would say she forms the basis for pretty well all ECE instruction right now. Every ECE. Yeah. Did you do education?
Early childhood education.
Okay, so you know more about Montessori than you ever
wanted to know.
Right, ever wanted to know. Give me a synopsis, so two-sentence synopsis of Montessori method.
Well, since I've spent the last 8 years trying to forget what I learned, because I went to a classical school, but it's basically that, well, the quote is fairly typical. She was the one that put in a lot of the like small chairs and small tables and everything, so that the children could have whole line of things, but on their level, and that they would just work in society as adults, but children, so they had everything child size.
Good, excellent. Right. And she says, look, we can figure this all out through scientific observation and experimentation, and we can create the optimal learning environment for children. And so she brings in stuff that we consider to be normal: child-sized desks, child-sized chairs. More on that later because she's not the first. And so she comes up with a child-centered approach to education, in which the curiosity of a child is paramount. Now you're going to find these ideas circulating in other places, in Dewey and that, but Montessori is the one that everybody studies. And I think that's what I'm after. What do teachers study in school? So, that's what she's known for. What is she not known for? Did you learn anything about what she believed?
I didn't.
No. And I have yet to find a teacher who said, yeah, I actually did learn what she believed. She claimed to be a devout Roman Catholic, and she was a member of the Roman Catholic Church throughout her life. But many of her ideas are quite divergent from traditional Catholicism. For Montessori, children were spiritual embryos, or divine embryos. That's the term she had. And they were seeking an expression in this material world. There's a Christian term for this heresy. It's called Gnosticism. I was looking to a professor there. Yeah, but you're Old Testament. That was before Gnosticism, right? So, what you're dealing with are little divine energies, little divine beings that are seeking expression, seeking to assume their place in the world. And these divine beings would achieve a redemption of the world. And this redemption was going to be accomplished through this evolutionary working out of the divine plan for the cosmos, in which we would achieve this universal brotherhood, this world of peace and harmony where we all hold hands and we all get along together. And that is something that is going to be common throughout the people I'm talking about. But she talks in terms of redemption. We are God's prime agents in creation, and we must endeavor to learn to do more effectively our share of work in this cosmic plan. This is the cosmic plan of redemption. Redemption was accomplished for us by Christ and Christ alone, but not for Montessori. We are part of that redemption. Our proud civilization and all the marvelous achievements of evolution, right, have made possible the self-sacrifice of humble saviors of which we are unconscious. So there are saviors all around us, and these are the people that have been moving society forward, progressing, evolving. And we don't know who they all are, but what we have to do is engender this among this attitude with our students. So it was through children that God was working out this divine plan of salvation for the cosmos. This is not a direct quote, it's almost a direct quote. And so quoting Matthew, Montessori said, it was Christ who showed us what a child really is, the adult's guide to the kingdom of heaven. As Lutherans, we should have just a little bit of problem with something like that. We do not look to the Word, we do not look to Christ's called and ordained servants, we do not look to any authority outside of ourselves, because we are the ones our children are the ones who reveal the kingdom of heaven to us. Terrible exegesis, but, the innocent child, what type of thing.
Through their pushing forward the evolution of the species? I don't understand what it means.
Okay, well, picture yourself, we're post-World War I, right?
Yeah.
Europe's obliterated. She's in Italy. I almost said she's in Italian. But she's in Italy. And Europe's been devastated by war. But after the war, there's this great optimism that things are going to, now we got it out of our system. Now we can rebuild the world. It's the war to end all wars. Now we're done with war. And Montessori and many others are kind of latching on with this, okay, how are we going to progress? How are we going to achieve this vision?
Oh, so we're going to fix humanity by fixing them and their kids.
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Right. That is universal. And
what's really crazy about that is that the kids coming along, so which child are you that creates that redemptive work?
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah, but I get that, but I have kids.
Are there terminals?
So what did they do when they became adults that now they need to be redeemed again because they have kids?
Well,
the logic of it doesn't make any sense.
It's an evolutionary process. So the next generation will take it another step forward. For Montessori, children were to become masters of their own mind and learn that which interested them. And it's the teacher or the adult who gave unnecessary direction or who gave unnecessary instruction was then, in effect, guilty of subverting this divine evolving plan of the cosmos. Because you were telling the children what they should learn, when their divinity inside of them was telling them what they should learn. Who are you going to listen to, God or the teacher?
Sounds like a mystical version of Rousseau.
Well, I say it's Gnostic.
Yeah.
It really, yeah. And I say Gnosticism for Montessori because I want to use mysticism on the next person. So why? Yeah, you don't want to overuse a label. So, could someone read this quote for me?
The child whose attention has once been held by a chosen object, while he concentrates his whole self on the repetition of the exercise, is a delivered soul in the sense of the spiritual safety of which we speak. From this moment, there is no need to worry about him, except to remove obstacles which may bar his way to perfection.
Okay. That's a quote you didn't learn. And you didn't even learn it in a Lutheran school. But there's so much in this quote where, as Lutherans, we should be going, not the least of this idea of barring a child's way to perfection. And that way to perfection is barred when we disrupt what they want to learn. And say, well, actually, you should learn this. Any questions about Montessori before we move on? Of her.
Did she have any view? I don't remember learning anything about discipline at all in becoming a teacher. So did she have any views on how to discipline a child when they're, let's say, hurting another child because they do that? Did she have any views on
You might have, researched this. This was just word of mouth from a Montessori teacher, but she said at their Montessori preschool, if a child, say, bit someone, they took that as an indication of, we need to teach you the correct thing to bite, and so then they gave him a carrot.
Well, that's because he's trying to learn.
John Piaget, a little bit later than Montessori, not by much. If you went to school, if you took a child psych course, if you took any psychology course, if you did educational stuff, you came across John Piaget, second most cited author in the world of psychology, next to B.F. Skinner, and the most cited psychologist in the world of education. Fortunately, he was not a psychologist. His real interest was biology. He was trained in biology. His interest was mollusks, and then epistemology. So he's closer to a philosopher than a psychologist. But psychology wrapped his ideas and adapted them. So he's known for cognitive development, and he has these 4 stages of learning. You go from A, B, C, A, and you progress. Every child progresses through these stages, and we all have to learn what stages you progress in. Erikson expands it and changes it, and then Fowler comes along later, and he applies it to faith, and he has, I think, 7 stages of faith. I don't know. But it's this whole developing idea, the 4 distinct stages. And this fellow, someone said, who is he? He has had a profound influence on how teachers are taught to understand the learning process. This is how children learn. No questions about it. What he is less well known for are his many theological writings that he produced as a young man. Theological writings that he never disavowed. In fact, as an old man, he endorsed what he wrote. And in there, he has strong mystical tendencies, and here comes the mystic. For Piaget, God was not transcendent. God was not out there. God was not the triune God apart from us. God was immanent. He was immanent in all people, not just in Christians. And so, for him, God was inside. Now, how do we get to know about God? How do we get to know truth and wisdom, which comes from God? Pardon? Maybe. Right? Where do you look? Maybe that's where do you look? Right? Because for Piaget, truth and knowledge were revealed through the biological mind, and the biological mind was equal to God. As a young man, his mother, who was a very devout reform in Switzerland, tried to enroll him in a course of theological studies. And he hated it because his interest was biology. And so he couldn't figure out how religion and theology could match with evolutionary theory and biology. And this troubled him. And he recounts an encounter. It was with a book that was given to him by his godfather. But it was an atheistic book. Go figure. So, this is as an old man. He says, I recall one evening a profound revelation. The identification of God with life itself was an idea that stirred me almost to ecstasy because it now enabled me to see in biology the explanation of all things and of the mind itself. So for him, God isn't like, where Jesus says, I am life. No. Biological life is God. Right? The biological mind is God. And as the mind evolves, so we are evolving towards the perfection of our divinity and of our understanding of that God. So, if the biological mind is God, where are you going to find truth? It is going to be found internally. And so he talks about this evolution of a child toward spiritual equilibrium. So when you progress through these 4 stages, at the end of it, you have achieved a spiritual equilibrium. And the whole idea is that if we can implant this in education and develop it, then the whole world will kind of eventually get to this spiritual equilibrium, where there's this divine energy that's floating through everything. I'm sorry I'm going through these slides so quickly, but if you want to. So this immanent God is all part of one grand evolutionary movement that includes society, religion, knowledge, and biology. It's ignored by, his theological ideas are ignored by the psychological community. And one article I came across, it was really quite decent. It was the embarrassing truth of Piaget the mystic. That's what it's called. Is that in the 1940s and 50s, it was profoundly embarrassing to be identified as having any theological, spiritual views, even though they're wacky. And so, because he becomes known for his psychological views, that part kind of just falls by the wayside. But it's all there in his writings, first source stuff. So if education can be reworked according to his views of the development of the child, society at large would achieve this new balance. Once again, like Montessori, we're all going to be in this perfected state, this noble plane. Okay, that's really quick for these 2 people. And I wanted to get these through quickly because I wanted to get to someone else who is kind of the psychologist du jour for education. If you went to Teachers College pre-1985, you didn't learn these guys. I didn't learn them. I didn't learn about this next one. But if you've gone to school any time in the past 20 years, you know you can roll your eyes at the very mention. So now I'm going to click and you can start rolling your eyes. And it's Vygotsky. So Lev Vygotsky is an educational psychologist who worked in Russia in the 20s and 30s. Now that should give you just a little hint about his leanings, because something really big is going on in Russia in the 20s and 30s. Mind you, I have a knowledge survey, just 20 questions that I hand out to all my teachers. I'm compiling a database. One of those questions is, what big thing happened in Russia in the 1920s? And no one can identify. Well, I give the date of the Russian Revolution. They can't do it. I get about a 20% answer rate. I only get 20% where I can identify the people that America was at war with in World War II. 22% can say Russia, Japan, or Japan, Italy, and Germany. Some will say France, some will say Britain. What? Yeah. It's pretty impressive. Right.
That's because none of us got to go to the classes.
Only 30% could identify the date of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I would accept the true date and not the July 4th date, I would accept either date. I wasn't picky. Anyway, okay, that's getting aside. But that actually grows out of Dewey, and it grows out of Vygotsky, and it grows out of all these people for a brief review of history. Okay, So, Vygotsky has been called the Mozart of psychology. It was a label that was applied to him in the late 70s, and it has stuck in the English-speaking world. He has garnered a great deal of attention by North American educationalists in the last 40 years. And like I said, in which you concur with, every student coming out can spit back Vygotsky's theories, and their eyes roll when you do it. All I have to say is scaffolding and then it goes. Okay. So language development and the theory of zones of proximal development. Anyone want to give you're nodding your head.
Zones of proximal development, I never quite grasped very well. Scaffolding kind of makes sense because we know the word from other places. So
Right. Okay.
I was able to hook things onto the scaffolding.
There you go. This is the dumbed down version. I could get professors really mad at me. But hold on to your seats here. So the zone of proximal development is that you become comfortable with one set of knowledge, one area of knowledge, right? Then when you're comfortable with that, you can move into another area in development. That's it.
Stories, let the children learn what they want.
Well, scaffolding is giving the tools by which you enable a person to learn the basic information, then you give the tools to learn the next set of information, and so on. I know you're saying so, but every student knows ZDP is ZPD. What they don't know, and which they've never been taught, is that he is a committed Marxist-Leninist educator that is working in revolutionary Russia. And what they don't know, and what they are not taught, is that his stated goal, exclusive goal, is to apply Marxist principles to education. That is it for him. And he writes with Marxist fervor. Marxist psychology is not a school amidst schools, but the only genuine psychology as a science. A psychology that other than this cannot exist, and the other way around, everything that was and is genuinely scientific belongs to Marxist psychology. So much for the dispassionate scientist who looks at things objectively. Lev Vygotsky is not one of those. He is out to apply Marxist principles to a classroom to create the Soviet Superman, and he's influenced by Nietzsche with the Übermensch, where he's the new Soviet man who's going to rule the world. Yeah.
I didn't know if Bill Ayers had a lot to do with promoting him in American education.
Who?
Bill Ayers,
Never mind.
William Ayers, University of Chicago.
Could be. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's a whole nother trail of thought. Right. So for Vygotsky, now for Piaget, truth is internal. It's constructed internally by the students. For Vygotsky, and this is where it should sound strikingly, uncomfortably familiar, is that truth is constructed from the other people around you, from society, from the collective, if you wish. Truth is never outside of interaction. Truth is social. Truth can only come from looking at our social setting. That's his direct quote. And so for him, the church had a monopoly on truth and had foisted their truth and was in league with bourgeois society to create this morality which made people feel guilty and made them feel inferior and kept them in their working class status. And so the church had imposed a version of truth that was unacceptable, and he calls it a bourgeois morality. That was the place. Now, Vygotsky is actually Jewish, so there's a whole another layer that's being thrown on top of that. So for too long, the church has been had by preaching the kingdom of God after death implanted a kingdom of enslavers in the world. In place of Christian morality, there would be new morality constructed by perfected socialist society. So what he wants to do is get rid of the old morality, which was responsible for all sorts of wicked and awful things. He says, now we're going to release children to create a brand new morality, one that comes from themselves. When I say it should sound familiar, because you get echoes of this throughout our society now, that this is how we determine morality. And so he looks at the classroom as a new socialist collective, and a socialist collective where students learn best from their peers. And he's taking ideas right out of Lenin here about awakening. Lenin talks about awakening the socialist consciousness. And for Vygotsky, this is where it's going to happen in the classroom. And so it's not the teacher, because the teacher represents authority, right? Teacher represents power. Instead, it's going to be from one another. And he even talks about, what happens when a child is disruptive? And he's not talking just disruptive like, he's throwing spitballs at Susie. Or, Vladimir. He's talking about disruptive ideas. What happens to the Lutheran kid that stands up in the classroom and says, I think this is wrong, this is what I believe? There he says that while a teacher should not use force to correct him, because that's just replicating his power structure, the classroom should be structured in such a way that the group will compel the individual to conform to the collective morality, which is how we structure our classrooms today in America.
That's how we structure our society.
Well, yeah. Yeah. These are all socialist. It comes right out of Vygotsky. So now, let's talk about his zone of proximal development. On the surface, that sounds, that's okay. But what he's trying to do with it is create this new collective so that the people that move you through these proximal zones are your peers. And they move you to where you should be. Because they collectively, they know best.
Did Vygotsky have an idea that children are created pure and not sinful?
Well, that is all, that's Marxist stuff.
Okay.
That's Enlightenment stuff. It's all over the place.
Okay.
That runs through all of these people we're talking about.
Well,
Children are sinless.
Okay.
And that's the dividing line between Christian education and secular education thing. Are children sinless? Oh, yeah, goodness. You passed. I'm sorry, we should look at the correct crowd to affirm you or correct you. So see, you can't separate his theories, and he would be appalled. He said he even writes this way, you can't separate this from Marxism. It is what it is. This is how Marxism expresses itself. Yeah.
So, clearly, if he didn't come up with it, he would be in favor of it. But was this the start of the whole cooperative learning, working in groups, that movement?
Well, you also see it in, that's really big in American education. But you see ideas of that in Montessori, you see ideas of that in John Dewey. And actually, Bill Heine kind of alerted me to this. And I was up at 6 this morning reading all about the interaction between Dewey and Vygotsky. Because Dewey makes 2 trips over to Russia, 1922 and 1928. And he's sitting there. I'd love to find out more about what they're talking about and their ideas, because you read Dewey and his pragmatism, and you read Vygotsky and his Marxism, and at times it's like, I don't know which one I'm reading. They're very, very close, right? Which tells you something right there. So they're all swimming in the same cesspool of ideas. Actually, swimming in the same swimming pool of ideas, right? So they're all, you can't separate these people. They're influenced by one another. So now, here's the thing. Vygotsky dies 1936 of tuberculosis. Shortly thereafter, Uncle Joe says, well, he was Jewish, we can't talk about his ideas anymore, and they're forgotten in Soviet society. The other thing is, his ideas aren't working in Soviet society because it's a totalitarian system. And saying we have a collective where we all look to each other doesn't work in totalitarianism. So it's basically forgotten. So now we say, well, what happened? Why did you learn it? How did it go from Moscow to where did it go to Nebraska? How did it get to the cornfields of Nebraska? Is not that Seward's in a cornfield.
It's right next to it.
Yes. Okay. Because after his death, it's pretty well forgotten. I'm going to skip this slide. Okay. Oh, I did want to bring this quote. The last quote is really good. He rejoices that under communism, the 1,000-year link between morality and religion has been broken. Morality is beginning to acquire an increasingly temporal character, which, read America, right? Read Canada. Okay. So his ideas are forgotten. Now what happens, 1962, his work, Mind and Society, I have to look it up. Thought and Language. His work, Thought and Language, is translated into English. 1962. Height of the Cold War, right after 1950s. You think, how can a Marxist get in? Well, they delete all references to Lenin and Marx in the translation. So now he's just this neutral guy who worked in Russia and was, hated by Korcok. 1978, Mind and Society is released, and it's warmly received by American intellectual elites. They drool over this. This is not edited. But by that time, people are opening up to, they're more open to communism and Marxism. They're starting to talk about it in favorable ways. Maybe you can add something to this. Okay, 10 minutes? 5. Oh, got to talk faster. Now, here's the cool thing. So that's 1978. That's when he gets the moniker Mozart of psychology. And begins to be adopted by schools of education in the 1980s. What's happening in Russia in the 1980s? It's crumbling. It's morally bankrupt, financially bankrupt. It's just falling apart. So the very system that Vygotsky helped create is crumbling into the ground. And it is being exported. And here's the irony. It is being, at that very time, it's being exported into the system that he thought that Soviet socialism had triumphed over. Do you get the irony of it? He thought that, well, yeah, but he thought that the Soviet Russia was going to be the world leader. It was going to lead the world on. And capitalism had been obliterated. Right? So now the communist system falls into the ground, and that's just when American educationalists pick them up and say, hey, we should use this in our classrooms. So, quick note, postmodern neo-Marxists see Vygotsky as a kind of a hero person. Because now instead of the bourgeois ruling elite, it is those who have power, right? White males. And instead of the working class proletariat, it is the oppressed minority. Plug in whichever minority you want. And now we have the same thing. We have to combat this. So the big question, so what do you make of these people? What do you do? Well, and this is, if you walk away with one thing and one way to talk to other educators, it's to ask the Lutheran question, so what do they teach, believe, and confess? That's the question we should always be asking of everyone we adopt. A theologian and non-theologian. Who are they? What do they teach, believe, and confess? Because we haven't done that in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod since the 1800s. We quit doing that, asking that question. Well, the answer is yes, but all of these things are useful. Are you saying people don't learn by scaffolding? Well, here's what I want to say, is the usable parts of these theories are already found in approved and orthodox Christian educators. Augustine talks about, at length, making learning pleasurable. Erasmus, okay, he's not orthodox, but Erasmus will talk about the need to make a learning environment accessible to children. He does talk about having child-sized desks. He does talk about using innovative tools to keep a child interested. He talks about making letters and putting them on targets and having children, boys, do target practice to spell out words, right? I don't know how well that would go. Well, maybe with but scaffolding. Can you think of an example of scaffolding in the Lutheran confessions? The preface to the small catechism. How do you teach the catechism? First, you start with the basic primary text. Then you teach the meaning. And after that, if you have time, you move on to the large catechism. That's scaffolding. My favorite author, or favorite educator of the 1500s, Friedland Valentin Trotzendorf. With a name like that, who wouldn't want to have? You want Trotzendorf as your headmaster. Trotzendorf writes... I mean, people respect Trotzendorf. You go see Principal Trotzendorf. But he writes Goldberg school orders. He's cool. He's so cool. And he says a teacher must always address his students as meine liebe Kindlein, my dear little children. You should never do anything else. And a teacher must always make sure that every lesson has something of interest to the children to excite their interest. Oh, really? Tell that to Maria Montessori. Right? Yeah.
And I know you said you didn't want to put down the educators, but how does the Concordia system, where we train educators,
right?
How was none of this ever looked at? And I get the theory is maybe you could say some of the theory, the scaffolding,
right.
You could say the theory is good, but why would we promote something that is so
because we stopped asking that question. We just stopped asking that question of educators.
Why? Who do we need to
well,
no,
I get that's what happened, but you think that in the
I want to stop you for a second because I really don't want to make it sound like this is an evil conspiracy.
Well, but we've been feeling this way for years as we struggled in our classrooms in Lutheran schools, reading this even in college, knowing that it was baloney, and then trying and working in the Lutheran school system where the books are provided by the state, so it all has this nice.
But I've been down that.
And knowing it's wrong and having to get to this place where we're here to relearn everything that we should have learned.
But we've all been down that path. I was down this path where it's like, okay, well that's how children learn. Okay, that's how you set up a classroom. And it was only by God's grace and a bit of serendipity and not full preparation on my part that I started down this path of asking that question. So I think a lot of it is a very slow, patient education, and just asking the question automatically changes the conversation to where it should be. And so just the patient asks the question, what do they teach leading in class? Simple thing. So I'm sorry I cut you off. I do not want to.
Belligerent.
I mean, we have tensions. We have tensions. I think every Concordia is experiencing tensions, right? But I'm not. I really do want to do the eighth commandment part.
Well, that's why I'm saying we did the Concordia. I'm not saying it's one or the other. It's just like when did we stop asking that question?
We stopped asking those questions after World War I. Because the short answer is we wanted to fit in so badly after the persecutions. We had churches that were burned down, schools that were burned down. And after World War I, there's a change in attitude where they start looking to Dewey and progressivism because that's what everyone else is doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is the early 20th century education became presented as a science. And so we opened, so the classical model of the gymnasium and the things that have done so well for Lutheranism, we adopted the teacher college. No offense to all the Zurich teacher colleges, but the thought was that, well, now we know education is a science, and so we will teach the science. And then it's compatible, we'll have catechesis and really good education, just as good as the public schools. At the time, it did seem pretty good then. But so they adopted the science. Well, and what that did, it was these theories, but it was just, people looked at the results. Well, these are the findings of modern science. They didn't look at how they were ideologically created. They didn't look at the context of why these people came up with these ideas. Mm-hmm. The thought was that social science was just like, physics or chemistry. I mean, we don't know the scientists who came up with, chemistry, water is H2O. You can study physical things. They don't change on you. They don't wiggle out of your control like kids do. But the social scientists claim to be scientific in the same way. And so I think we had our teacher colleges, and so we brought in Dewey and all these other thinkers, and it was a brand new field. Education as a science. And so we just looked at the results of it and didn't go deeper than that. And for a while, it sort of worked in that there was a lot of, worldview capital that you could work on. And our schools had catechesis and some of these new ideas. But as the ideas kept going further down the abyss, it becomes more and more of actually undermining what we believe as Christians.
There's an interesting period, 1930s and 40s, where this is really debating about how our colleges and seminaries should be structured. There's a whole debate that it would make a great dissertation.
The March of Progress, too.
Yeah.
Is part of the March of Progress.
But there's a few voices. Theodore Grabner is saying, hold on, we shouldn't do it, but it's uncool. And, there are some orthodox voices, but this whole progress, synod's growing, we're building schools, we have this, we want to be as good as the world is, da-da-da-da-da. It becomes pretty hard to say, but it just is. And eventually that voice is forgotten. Yeah.
I think not only in pedagogy, but also even in theology, particularly after the Second World War, is the belief that somehow the tried and true methods, truths, the way of approaching things that we have done in the past simply are not going to be viable in this new atomic age that we are now in. And we need to rethink from top to bottom what it means to be the people of God and what it means to educate, to be a church, to have pastors and so on and so forth that brought us many of the struggles that we had, not only in education, but also in pastoral ministry and theology as well, as you move with the decades following the Second World War.
Yeah, that whole area, I spent a week just on the floor of our library going through all the Lutheran school journals, tracing development. That'll be my favorite. It's a great topic.